how far to the right Israel has moved in recent years is the shocking fact that Avigdor Lieberman is employed as its foreign minister. Even Martin Peretz of the New Republic, who was well known for his unyielding support for Israel, describes Lieberman as a neo-fascist and equates him with the late Austrian fascist Jörg Haider. And there are other individuals in Netanyahu's cabinet who share many of Lieberman's views about the Israel-Palestinian conflict. They just happen to be less outspoken than the foreign minister. But even if someone like Livni or Olmert was able to cobble together a coalition of interest groups and political parties that favored giving the Palestinians a real state of their own, they would still face fierce resistance from the sizable forces that stand behind Netanyahu today. It is even possible, which is not to say likely, that Israel would be engulfed by a civil war if some future leader made a serious attempt to implement a two-state solution. An individual with the stature of David Ben-Gurion or Ariel Sharon, or maybe even Yitzhak Rabin, might be able to stand up to those naysayers and push forward a two-state solution. But there is nobody with that kind of standing in Israel politics today. In addition to these practical political obstacles to creating a Palestinian state, there is an important ideological barrier. From the start, Zionism envisioned an Israeli state that controlled all of mandatory Palestine. There was no place for a Palestinian state in the original Zionist vision of Israel. Even Yitzhak Rabin, who was determined to make the Oslo peace process work, never spoke about creating a Palestinian state. He was merely interested in granting the Palestinians some form of limited autonomy, what he called, quote, an entity which is less than a state. Plus, he insisted that Israel should maintain control over the Jordan River Valley and that a united Jerusalem should be the capital of Israel. Also remember that in the spring of 1998, when Hillary Clinton was First Lady, she was sharply criticized for saying that it would be in the long-term interests of peace in the Middle East for there to be a state of Palestine, a functioning modern state on the same footing as other states. It was not until after Ehud Barak became prime minister in 1999 that Israeli leaders began to speak openly about the possibility of a Palestinian state. But even then, not all of them thought it was a good idea, and hardly any of them were enthusiastic about it. Even Barak, who seriously flirted with the idea of creating a Palestinian state at Camp David in July 2000, opposed the Oslo Accords. Furthermore, he has been willing to serve as Netanyahu's defense minister, knowing full well that the prime minister and his allies are opposed to creating an independent Palestinian state. All of this is to say that Zionism's core beliefs are deeply hostile to the very notion of a Palestinian state, and this makes it difficult for many Israelis to embrace the two-state solution. In short, it is difficult to imagine any Israeli government having the political will, much less the ability, to dismantle a substantial portion of its vast settlement enterprise and create a Palestinian state in virtually all of the occupied territories, including East Jerusalem. Many advocates of a two-state solution recognize this problem, but think that there is a way to solve it. The Obama administration can put significant pressure on Israel to allow the Palestinians to have their own state. The United States, after all, is the most powerful country in the world, and it should have great leverage over Israel because it gives the Jewish state so much diplomatic and material support. Furthermore, President Obama and his principal foreign policy advisors are dedicated to establishing a viable Palestinian state living side by side with Israel. But this is not going to happen because no American president can put meaningful pressure on Israel to force it to change its policies towards the Palestinians. The main reason is the Israel lobby, a remarkably powerful interest group that has a profound influence on U.S. Middle East policy. Alan Dershowitz was spot on when he said, "My generation of Jews became part of what is, perhaps, the most effective lobbying and fundraising effort in the history of democracy." That lobby, of course, makes it impossible for any president to play hardball with Israel, especially on the issue of settlements. Let's look at the historical record. Every American president since 1967 has opposed settlement building in the occupied territories. Yet no president has been able to put serious pressure on Israel to stop building settlements and much less dismantle them. Perhaps the best evidence of America's impotence is what happened in the 1990s during the Oslo peace process. Between 1993 and 2000, Israel confiscated 40,000 acres of Palestinian land, constructed 250 miles of connector and bypass roads, doubled the number of settlers, and built 30 new settlements. President Clinton did hardly anything to halt this expansion. Indeed, the United States continued to give Israel billions of dollars in foreign aid each year and to protect it at every turn on the diplomatic front. One might think that Obama is different from his predecessors, but there is little evidence to support that belief. Consider that during the 2008 presidential campaign, Obama responded to charges that he was soft on Israel by pandering to the lobby and repeatedly praising the special relationship. In the month before he took office, he was silent during the Gaza massacre, when Israel was being criticized around the world for its brutal assault on that densely populated enclave. After taking office in January 2009, President Obama and his principal foreign policy advisors began demanding that Israel stop all settlement building in the occupied territories, to include East Jerusalem, so that serious peace negotiations with the Palestinians could begin. After calling for 2 states for 2 people in his Cairo speech in June 2009, the President declared, "It is time for these settlements to stop." Secretary of State Clinton had made the same point 1 month earlier when she said, "We want to see a stop to settlement construction, additions, natural growth, any kind of settlement activity." That is what the President has called for. George Mitchell, the President's special envoy for the Middle East, conveyed this straightforward message to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his lieutenants on numerous occasions. In response, Netanyahu made it equally clear that Israel intended to continue building settlements and that he and almost everyone in his ruling coalition opposed a 2-state solution. He made but a single reference to 2 states in his own speech at Bar-Ilan University on June 14, 2009, and the conditions he attached to it made it clear that he was talking about giving the Palestinians a handful of disconnected apartheid-style Bantustans, not a fully sovereign state. Netanyahu, of course, won this fight. the Israeli Prime Minister not only refused to stop building the 2,500 housing units that were under construction in the West Bank at the time, but just to make it clear to Obama who